It may be sweater weather outside, but now it's time to bundle up and gather around here, the College Crossfire.
Let's do this.
He's coming back for that 2021 MVP. He's better than Josh Allen. He's better than Baker Mayfield. He's not better than Mahomes. I can't say that.
Well, Justin Tucker gives him his 99 rating in Madden.
Ceiling is the roof. There is no roof, so they have a pretty high ceiling.
That's enough talk. Let's talk. Welcome to College Crossfire. I am your host, Drew Jacob. Let's make the rounds. On first base, we've got Jacob. Jacob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm ready to win. And yeah, let's get started.
Absolutely. It's for that all-important first win of the semester. On second base, we've got Matt. Matt, how are we doing?
I mean, after the tournament champions last semester, I got unfinished business. I think we're going to take care of that tonight.
This is the Matt Marinchak Revenge Tour, everybody. And on third base, we've got Clark. Clark, how you feeling?
I'm kind of feeling the heat from Matt since we're relatively close together, so I'm feeling this is going to be a fun show.
Absolutely. Good to see you too. Freezing outside, but tensions are boiling in here. Enough talk, y'all. Let's talk. After a hot start to the season, Texas men's basketball has cooled off significantly, going just 6-4 in their last 10 games, including a beatdown last night in Chris Beard's homecoming against Texas Tech. Things won't be getting any easier for the Longhorns either, with games against number 20 Iowa State, number 10 Kansas, and number 8 Baylor in the next 10 days, and an additional 2 ranked games later this month. February will prove to be a major vibe check for the team. So, with that said, how are we feeling about Texas basketball right now, and how do you guys think this gauntlet will play out for the team? Jacob, we're going to start with you.
All right. So do you guys remember back in the preseason when we ranked number 5 in the country and number 2 in the Big 12? Because I unfortunately do. Like every other team for the past decade, whether it be football or basketball, we said, oh my gosh, they have a new coach. They have one transfer. Let's make them the best team in the nation. Like all times, we have failed consistently. Chris Beard's not a bad coach by any stretch of the imagination. His first year at Tech, he went 18-16. The next year, they went to the Elite 8. The year after that, they were the national championship runner-up. So the thing is there. The foundation is there. However, Texas looks weak. Last night, they were bullied consistently by Texas Tech. And frankly, they've been lacking the same thing they've been lacking for the last 10 years on. They've been lacking passion. And until the Longhorns get passion, they're going to get embarrassed like they will there. You guys need to hit your parlays. Put every single parlay against Texas now for at least the next 6 games, unfortunately.
No, absolutely. Like we were kind of talking about before the show, the loss to Tech isn't really what's bothering Longhorn faithful. Rather, it's the fact they didn't show up, they got pants, they got their lunch money stolen, they look dead out there on the court. That all said, Matt, we're on to you next.
Well, I'm going to agree with Jacob right here. When you start off the season ranked in the top 5, obviously overhyped for a new team pretty much with all transfers, a new coach. Very overhyped, and considering the success they had in preseason, not preseason, but pre-Big 12 play, they had a lot of wins, but they were also playing Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Alabama State, the powerhouse in Cardinal Ward. They weren't playing good teams. When they did play the tough teams like Seton Hall and Gonzaga, they lost. So they weren't battle tested for the Big 12. The Big 12 is the best conference in college basketball. You look at all the ranked teams, all the tough defenses in this conference, they just weren't ready for it. They go in, they start off with a win and a loss, and like everybody's like, oh, what happened? I'll tell you what happened is this team doesn't have an identity. When you look at their rotation, they don't have a solid rotation. Beard is switching guys out very quickly, and there's no consistency at all. Look at last night against Tech. In a game where you're trying to win, 5 minutes into the game, you do not put Avery Benson in because you want to troll the Tech fans. Like, I get it, like, Beard wants to make a statement, but he's a guy who's played maybe 5 games the whole season, scored 1 point on a free throw all season. You don't put him in the first 5 minutes. You put him in when you're either up or down by 20. And then their rotation was just a mess last night, and they're on the court all over the place. They have no true ball handler. Their bigs aren't aggressive in the paint. This team needs to figure something out because this schedule is not going to be easy. They're playing all these ranked teams, and if they don't figure something out soon, there's a good possibility they don't even make the tournament.
Ooh, that is a bold take. It would take a real disintegration to not make the tournament. But I do have to agree, we know it's a talented roster for Texas, but starting to wonder, is it a well put together roster? And with that, we're going to go to Clark.
It's one of those things where, not to disrespect your guys' answers at all, but I think we need to look at this from a different perspective. You can talk about things like passion, you can talk about energy, but you know what wins games? Execution. And that's the big problem for Texas right now. Let's think about what happened in the game last night. Yeah, the Avery Benson thing happened, but what really happened? did you notice something? When Texas was cutting the lead below 10, who was scoring the basketball? It was Marcus Carr. And that's been the key difference in this team this season, is they're actually not that far away from being good. And yes, the Big 12 is very good, but in the games Texas has been winning, Marcus Carr is putting 20 points per game on the board. And one thing he struggled to adjust to this season is Texas runs a motion offense. And a motion offense, I'm not going to try to get too technical here. It's basically where you pass a bunch. And one thing Texas is doing right now is overpassing. They need to do a little bit more dribble drive. That's how they get more shots off and they'll put more points on the board, because we know their offense has been a problem. They just haven't been able to score at that high of a rate. Marcus Carr last season when he was at Minnesota, when he was averaging 20 points per game, he was shooting 15 shots per game. Now he's way below that at 9. And Timmy Allen's another guy. He was shooting 13 shots per game at Utah. Now he's shooting 8 at Texas, and he's only scoring 11 points per game. That's a huge difference. And I think it's one of those things where you got to remember, this is a big experiment with these players and Chris Beard. I think Beard is going to start to realize that eventually he's going to have to adjust and let these guys just do what they do, which is go one-on-one and be aggressive. And I think when they do that, we're going to see a big change in this team. I still have faith in them. You got to remember, Baylor is a highly ranked team. They have the second best odds to win the national championship, but they got destroyed by Alabama and the SEC and Big 12 Challenge, and they didn't play that well against West Virginia. And West Virginia is not a good team this year, and Kansas didn't even look like they belonged against Kentucky. So I think Texas can beat them. And Iowa State, they're ranked number 20 right now, but they're 3-6 in conference. These are all winnable games for Texas. Now, they may not win the Big 12, but if they get a couple wins, that can give them some momentum in the NCAA tournament, and then they could become a dangerous team at this point, and that's something where Chris Beard has always specialized in.
Absolutely. You know, you mentioned this going player by player. You see the talent on this roster. There's nobody Texas should fear, but it really is going to come down to execution, both on the coaching staff, putting these guys in the right spots, and also the players themselves getting to the basket, getting boards. I mean, you play to win the game. You play to score. And with that, Clark, we're going to give you the 3. Matt, you'll be getting the 2. And Jacob, the 1. A lot of game left, though. And now we're going to shift over to women's basketball. The Big 12 standings are an absolute logjam, with only 2.5 games separating first place Iowa State from 6th place Kansas. 7th place West Virginia is technically only one more game out, but the segment's about real contenders, and we're not running a charity here. Meanwhile, 13th ranked Texas is sitting in 5th place, with chances to climb the ladder in upcoming games against Baylor, OU, and of course, Iowa State. All that said, will Texas be able to climb to the top of the heap, and if not, who do you see claiming the Big 12 regular season title? On this one, we're starting with Matt.
Well, don't get me wrong. This is a very good Texas team, but I don't see them winning the Big 12. There may be, look at the competition in the Big 12, they're maybe the 3rd best team. Baylor's as good as they've ever been. Iowa State, they're good. Yes, Texas beat them, but Iowa State is missing their best 2 players that game. And Texas, they are a very sound team on the defensive side of the ball. They force a lot of turnovers. They don't let the opponent score a lot. But you look at their offense. There's some fixes that can be made. You look at the loss against Oklahoma. They shot from the 3, 33%. That's not very good. I think across the board they were only shooting about 35% that game. And the free throws, they shot 75% free throws that game. That's not going to win you games, especially when you turn over the ball 24 times against Oklahoma, the most in a game since 2019. And they've had a few games this season where they've turned the ball over between 15 and 20 times. You're not going to win those games, and they really are making adjustments. I remember I came on this show after the first game, after they beat New Orleans, and I said the 2 things this team needs to fix is free throws and turnovers, and those are things they haven't fixed yet. And they're just not shooting the ball well. They're shooting contested threes instead of going to the paint for the easy buckets. They have good bigs in Gaston and Ebo, and they're not giving them the ball. They'd rather throw up a contested 3 that's going to hit the backboard instead of going for the easy points. That's what's cost them a few games. While I do think there are some changes and things they need to improve on, but they're not going to win the Big 12. They're still going to make the tournament, but right now the road to the Big 12 still goes through Waco.
You know, absolutely. This is true across all sports. You don't have to play perfect, but you have to do the easy things right. You're right. Texas women's basketball is absolutely not doing that, like you said, with the turnovers and the free throws. So they're frankly not talented enough to just overcome that. I appreciate your take. Clark, we're moving on to you next.
I'm way more optimistic, to be honest, because this team's margin of victory is 20 points per game, which is pretty impressive. And what you got to remember, they're really, really young. And they're number 13 in the country already. My goodness, think about that upside. Rory Harmon is a freshman, and she is their best player. And yes, they did have a lot of turnovers in the Oklahoma game, but they also forced 27 turnovers, which is the most Oklahoma has had all season. Now the problem right now, and this is the reason I don't think they're going to win the regular season title, is the standings are just so weird and all over the place, and I think they probably will drop another game because they've had a tendency to have some hiccups, which is normal for a young team because Vic Schaefer is still trying to develop them, but they're showing flashes of brilliance. I think this team's actually going to shine more in the Big 12 tournament because they'll have more maturity by then, they'll have a greater sense of chemistry, and also Roy Harmon will be more adjusted and ready for those clutch moments, and I think it'll be an improvement on last year because this team has already exceeded expectations in my mind.
This is a good point. You know, young teams, they have a tendency to improve more so over the season than you see with more veteran teams. Hopefully that is something that the Texas squad experiences. And to round this one out, we're going to Jacob.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different route here. I agree with what Clark said, and I agree with what Matt said, both on several different points. However, this team, of their 4 top leading scorers, 3 are upperclassmen, and that's something that they have that a lot of other teams don't have right now. You get some of the best teams in college basketball over the last decade. What did they have? They had veteran leadership, and that's something that Texas has. That whenever Rory, I believe there was 2 other freshmen that came with her too, whenever they're struggling and they're falling behind, yes, Rory is by far the best scorer on that team, and she's going to be in 3 years. She's going to be incredible. She already is. But when they fall behind and they get into the trenches, who it's going to be? They're going to rely on the center and the power forward to go ahead and pull them out. What else are they going to rely on? A proven coach in Vic Schaefer. And Vic Schaefer, who upset UConn a few years ago, we all remember that. They took down a team that was on a 111-game winning streak. I like Texas women's basketball. I like what they've done. They lost to Oklahoma by 3. Like we said, we talked about it. It was an uncanny 24 turnovers. Yes, they average 15 a game, but they shoot 47% from the field and 35% from the 3. That's pretty decent. Their offense can hang with almost anybody out there. So I'm looking for them to upset in Baylor this Friday and this Sunday, and go ahead and start to make their way back up to the top.
You know, what I think I'm finding from this question is that it's just tough to know what to make of this team right now. I mean, 3 answers, 3 very different outlooks. That said, Matt, you're getting the 3 on this one. And then Clark and Jacob, you guys are actually tying for the 2. Next up, in news that made my producer and I do a major double take, Texas baseball is sitting pretty number 1 in the preseason rankings, above notable programs such as Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and even the defending national champion, the Mississippi State Bulldogs. On principle, I think that slotting in your reigning champs as number 4 is kind of disrespectful, but I can look the other way for Texas. That said, living up to the hype of the number 1 ranking is a tall task, you know, considering there's really nowhere else to go but down. So, I want to know, is Texas capable of delivering on these lofty expectations? And for this one, starting with Clark.
Texas fans, you always should be nervous when you see one of your teams being ranked number 1 because then it feels like you're going to fall to rock bottom. But this baseball team, I don't want to sound like I'm being wishy-washy on my answer. I do think they're going to win the Big 12, but I don't think it's a national championship team just yet. Now you have to remember, yes, they were a very good team last season, but what were the teams they struggled against? They struggled against SEC teams. They had that terrible 0-3 start. Mississippi State was one of the teams they lost to, and they also lost to Texas A&M, who were middle of the pack in SEC, which was a really bad loss. I hate to bring that up. And also, I think one of the biggest concerns I have this season is the loss of experience. Ty Madden, losing him as your ace is really big, even though the bullpen is really good. I don't think any of their starting pitchers are quite as good as Madden. I don't really see any of those being a first-round draft pick. And the thing I'm really worried about is their offensive production. Losing Cam Williams, losing Zach Zubia, and Mike Antico is huge because those guys are contact hitters. They deliver power in the lineup. They can hit home runs. And right now you really only have one home run hitter in Ivan Melendez. And Trey Faltini, for some reason, his freshman year, he had a great batting average. Last year, he struggled, and I'm worried about that continuing into the next season. But I think they're just so much more talented than the rest of the Big 12 that they'll be able to win the conference easily, and also they'll be able to rely on their defense with Silas Aridin and Douglas Hodo stepping up in the infield.
Absolutely. You know, this is a team that really should regionally dominate. I kind of use regionally in a figurative sense. Conferences aren't really regional anymore. But yeah, and you know, you look at that top 5, 4 of the teams are in the SEC.
Yeah.
That conference is rough, and you have to get through them to get to where that number 1 ranking would really tell you they should go. So I'm not sold on it. But Jacob, we're on to you next.
Texas winning the national championship. I'm just saying that right now. I think we all remember seeing that walk-off loss. I was working a double that day, my feet hurt, but my heart hurt way more when I saw that ball go into that left outfield. Texas is going to be motivated by that loss. Yes, we lost one of the best pitchers we've ever had in a first-round pick. We lost, I think it was like 4 or 5 guys went to the draft total. However, we have 6 players returning that have at least 150 at-bats. They have experience. They know how to get on base, even if they struggle at times. We have I forget his name, but he was one of our closers last year. He managed to keep us and pull us through the tournament, and now he's going to make his way into the starting rotation. We're going to have one of the best rotations in baseball, as we normally do, and our outfield is experienced. They all have at least 2 years of time. I'm all right with it. David Pierce has been here for 5 years now. This is year 6. This is time to make a statement. We have games against Tennessee this year. We have games against A&M in the regular season. It's really going to let us know what this team is made of. Let the SEC fight this year. Let them get into a dog match. Let them wear each other out. And then we just go for the throw in the playoffs. You know how it is. Horns by 90, even though that can't happen in baseball. But they're going all the way.
You know, you mentioned David Pierce, and that does remind me, one part of Texas's current situation that I think is really comfortable for them is I don't think they're worried about David Pierce being their guy. You know, now they're in the situation where their coach is in a prove it in the playoffs, prove it in the World Series situation, you know, get over the hump. And as frustrating as that is a place to be, it is also a pretty safe place to be in the grand scheme of the sport. And to round off this question, we're going to Matt.
When you look at this baseball team, they do have high expectations, but you got to look at why. They had a great postseason run last season. They have a lot of guys returning that have the experience of Omaha, and they have that chip on their shoulder. They also have a lot of young talent coming in, and you got to look at it across the board: defense, hitting, pitching, coaching. They are pretty complete as a team. Their pitching staff of Nixon and Quintanilla coming out of the bullpen to back up Hanson, Stevens, and Witt on the starting rotation, plus other freshmen and young guys on the roster. They have a great pitching staff, and they're coached by Sean, who's a great coach. And you look at the defense. Silas Hardwan, he's our catcher. He's an All-American. He led the Big 12, I believe, last year in catching runners who were stealing. Infielders, they have Trey Fautini's good defense. And then you look at the batting order, you got guys that can rate. Ivan Melendez, he can hit home runs, he can get hot at any given moment. Mitchell Daly, Douglas Hodo III, they're all guys that could hit. And then going back to the coaching staff, Coach Pierce has proved time and time again he's a solid coach. Coach Allen, the pitcher's coach, has proved he's pretty good. And then you also have Coach Tulo, the volunteer assistant coach, and he's really been a spark for this team. He's given the team some confidence because he knows how to win. He's won a lot in MLB, and he's trying to help bring that culture to the team. I think the guys are really buying into that. That's why we saw them go into that big run last year. And then they have a lot of young guys, a lot of quality depth, because they have guys like Dylan Campbell and Kevin Cash. They really haven't had a lot of opportunities, but when they will get opportunities one day, they're going to live up to the expectations. But for the Texas team, obviously, any team will have ups and downs throughout the season, but when it matters the most, Texas is going to prove why they're number one.
I think we can tell from this string of answers, Texas has got a strong roster, they've got an experienced roster. They've got a strong coaching staff, they've got an experienced coaching staff. The only reason I think people should be wary of Texas living up to expectations is because the expectations are literally for them to be number one. That said, Clark, you're going to be getting the 3 on this one, Jacob the 2, and Matt the 1. Strong answers all around, though. When we come back, we're going to be looking back at the NFL playoffs and looking ahead to Super Bowl 56. You won't want to miss it. Ooh, welcome back to College Crossfire. But before we get started, let's take a look at the scoreboard. Leading the show, we've got Clark with a solid 8 points. Coming in second, we've got Matt with 6 points, and then bringing up the rear, we've got Jacob with 5. So as you can see, it's a very tight game, a lot of game left. Now, we're quickly approaching the zenith of the NFL season, as just the 2 teams left standing tall will meet in just over a week and a half for Super Bowl 56. Before we get to that, though, we're going to visit the morgue and look at the fallen franchises. 12 holes got dug for 12 souls. And as such, we're asking which of the eliminated playoff teams had the most embarrassing exit from the postseason. And on this one, starting with Jacob.
I've been waiting a long time for this one, guys. I've been waiting my entire college career for this moment. Oh, they do it every year, and I love it. The Dallas Cowboys, year after year, they show up in the regular season. They win 12 games. They win 13 games. Dak Prescott suddenly the MVP. Eventually, Ezekiel Elliott will outplay Tony Pollard for just one game of the season, and then everybody loses their mind. Oh my gosh. Not only did they lose to Jimmy Garoppolo, they lost to literally the Sun. They couldn't even play in their own home stadium. This team is a consistent joke year after year in the playoffs. And any team, look, I'm very sure about this. They had the #1 scoring offense and the #7 defense. Of the last 25 Super Bowl champions, 15 had top 10 in offense and top 10 in defense. And Dallas couldn't even get out of the first round with those numbers. This team is nothing but a bunch of regular season winners. And I am so sick of Monday Night Football against the Giants and the Washington Commanders now, I guess. Can we just get rid of that and move on? Realize this was the team of the 90s and start to move forward, please. Also fire Mike McCarthy.
They get on primetime so much because everybody watches them, Jacob. Now, as much as I hate to hear them get cooked, they did deserve it. What else can you really say? Just humiliating. I kept saying this year was different. It was all the same. Matt, an answer.
Well, I appreciate you stealing my answer. Now I'm up here trying to think of other teams, but let's look at the NFC. Let's stay in the NFC. Let's look at the Arizona Cardinals because they came in all this hype. You start off the season 9-0 or something like that. Kyler Murray, MVP candidate. D-Hop going crazy. James Conner, Chase Edmonds, their defense. Oh my, they're going to be the best. They're going to win the Super Bowl. You weren't the #1. I don't think they were the #1 seed. They were probably the #2 or 3, something like that. But you go in there against the Rams, and you get absolutely obliterated by the Rams on that Monday Night Wild Card game. Like, it wasn't even close. Kyler Murray was out there not knowing. He looked like a little kid running around like over there.
That was wrong.
He couldn't see down the field to throw the ball. He had the defense in his face the whole time. The Cardinals were just so overhyped. And they weren't even competitive in this game. They got absolutely, no one was even watching the game. They were watching the Marinchak at that point. There was no football for the Cardinals. There was nothing for them to do that game. They were just playing horrible. Kyler Murray showed no leadership. Russell Wilson brought it up during the Marinchak. He said if it was him, he'd go down the sidelines, cheering up his teammates, try to rally them. And then ESPN cuts to Kyler Murray sitting on the bench all sad. The Cardinals were just an embarrassing loss after a good season, a lot of high expectations. They just lost it. Everything is gone.
This is the Cliff Kingsbury cycle. You know, you're in September. He's an offensive genius. You know, give him everything he ever wants. A little later, it's a losing streak, but they'll rebound, and then disappointment. So you're absolutely right. Horribly embarrassing loss. They weren't even competitive. Clark, we're on to you next.
I'm going to have to put a whole division on blast because I can't decide which was worse between the Eagles and the Cowboys. The Eagles and Cowboys playoff performances were as big of a disaster as Tommy Wiseau's room. And one of those things is amusing to watch, at least. How did the Cowboys, at the end of the game, run with 14 seconds left, no timeouts, a quarterback draw up the middle, and then you try to set it up, and it looks like somebody coaching a 6th grade team. I don't know how else to say it. Because you have to know in that situation to give the ball to the umpire. And then with the Eagles, poor Troy Aikman, he just wanted to watch the Cowboys game. Don't you feel a little sorry for him that he had to watch that? At least with the Eagles, they should have made it competitive. And I thought they might be, but it turns out Jalen Hurts kind of got exposed against that Buccaneers defense, and he has a little bit of work to do this offseason. And this is what frustrates me with the NFL playoffs just a little bit. Like, this is my only complaint, is you look at a team like the Chargers, which are probably better than the Eagles and Cowboys because they play a much tougher schedule, and they don't get in, and the Cowboys and Eagles get in by virtue of being in an easy division. And the NFC East has been so bad for the past 20 years now. The only significant win they had was that Super Bowl against the Patriots with Nick Foles, which was 5 years ago. And it is ridiculous for this division to be as bad as it is when you have four franchises who are not only 4 of the most valuable franchises in the NFL, but 4 of the most valuable sports franchises in the world globally.
The Cowboys and Chargers played this year. That's a good way to settle who's better, right? And you know who won? The Cowboys. So other than that, though, I think that was an insane thing to say. But other than that, very strong points. The NFC East, I feel like there was hype building once they got 2 playoff bids. There was a lot of like told you so going on, and that ended very quickly. So Clark, despite my reservations, you're going to be getting the 3 on this one, and we're having another tie actually. Jacob and Matt are getting the 2. It's just fun to cook the embarrassing teams. Now, that's enough loser talk. It's time for our panelists to call their shots and let us know who's going to lift the Lombardi come February 13th. Is it going to be Joe Burr and the unlikely Cincinnati Bengals? Or will Matthew Stafford send all of Detroit and a few people in Los Angeles home happy with the Rams win? And on this one, starting with Matt.
I mean, you gotta give it to Cincy in the Super Bowl because, like, they were the underdogs against the Chiefs. They were the underdogs against the Titans. And guess what? They won both those games. You look at their defense, they're pretty good on defense. They have a pretty good pass rusher, Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. Secondary, you have Jesse Bates leading the way. And they held the Kansas City Chiefs offense to 3 points in the second half. And that was on the last drive of the regular game. They made their adjustments. Their defense just played really well all postseason. On the offensive side of the ball, they have a great receiving trio in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. 2 of them caught for over 1,000 yards this season. And then in the ground game, Joe Mixon's been having probably the best season of his career, over 1,000 yards. And then, the offensive line is very, very suspect, very questionable. We're not going to talk about them. The main reason why I'm going to pick the Cincinnati Bengals is Joe Burrow. Joe Burr, Joe Shiesty, Joey Franchise, call him what you want. This dude's a winner. He knows how to win games. He does what he needs to do to win the games. He got sacked 9 times against the Titans. And guess what? He won. That's never been done before. He came back from an ACL tear last year, and now his team's in the Super Bowl. That probably hasn't been done before. Joe Burrow knows how to win. He has great chemistry with his teammates, and he does it all with swag. So come Super Bowl Sunday, he's going to be hoisting out the Lamar trophy.
I think you can really summarize all that with 3 main points, right? 2 pros. Defense, not dominant, but solid. Joe Burrow loves being the underdog. I think he's something crazy like a 6-0 when they're a more than 3-point underdog. That offensive line, though, is a major con. The offensive line will be one of the worst units on a Super Bowl winning team that we've seen in recent memory. That said, Clark, we're on to you next.
Whoever wins the coin flipping over. No, I'm just kidding. I have to give an answer for that. But that shows you how I am 50-50 on this game. It's really hard for me to pick. I love Joe Burrow. I think he's kind of a classic throwback at quarterback because he's sort of like Joe Montana, ironically both named Joe. He has that cool factor. He has that likability to him. He has that calm under pressure, which you love. But that offensive line against Von Miller and Aaron Donald, that's going to be a mismatch nightmare. And also, I don't think Zach Taylor is as good of a coach as Sean McVay is. And I think Sean McVay really wants to prove himself after that Patriots Super Bowl and be the young genius head coach who finally wins a title. And Matthew Stafford's definitely going to have a chip on his shoulder. I think the Rams are going to win, but just barely. I think it could be like a 2 or 3 point Super Bowl, and this could be super exciting.
Absolutely. I think it is a very, very evenly matched Super Bowl. I think you can tell. I feel like there's more hype for this Super Bowl. It's 2 likable teams, 2 very evenly matched teams, 2 great quarterbacks. A lot to root for going both ways. But Jacob, we're going to round this one off with you.
I wouldn't say likable. The Rams really, they shouldn't have been in the Super Bowl in 2018, but that's beside the point. I like to bring up a pretty important point, something that really means a lot to me here. You can take the boy out of Detroit, but you can't take Detroit out of the boy. Matt Stafford, before this season, before this run, was one of the worst platformers we had ever seen. Yes, he had bad luck, but he also had Calvin Johnson there for a few of those runs, and he still couldn't pull it through. The only reason they made it out of Tampa Bay was because of Cooper Kupp. But you know what? The Bengals, somehow, some way, they shut down Travis Kelce and they shut down Tyreek Hill in that second half of that game. Not only that, they overcame Jackson and Brittany. That's something else that only Tom Brady's been able to do. Constantly and consistently, that defensive line steps up with Trey Hendrickson. In the back, you're going to have Von Bell step up in the biggest moments and Eli Apple letting you down in the first half. It's going to happen. But time and time again, it's going to happen. If you didn't fall in love with Joe Burrow back in 2019, I don't know how. But the world loves him, and the world's rooting for this superstar. And in one of the biggest cities in the world and one of the biggest stages on Sunday, Joey's going to be king, and he's going to be up there with that cigar and that Lombardi.
It's funny you bring up 2019 LSU, because I remember thinking all year that Joe Burrow and LSU felt like the team and the player of destiny. It's just something about Joe Burrow, because I've been feeling that all year for him too. Now, those aren't analytics, those aren't stats. It's all about your gut sometimes. That said, Matt is actually going to be the one getting the 3 on this one. Clark, you'll be getting the 2, and Jacob, you'll be getting the 1, but an acknowledgement that I think our guts are in the same place. Perfect. Now, we've got to take another break, but when we come back, it'll be for all the marbles, because up next is Rapid Fire. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to College Crossfire, and I hope our panel's ready to think on their toes because it's time for rapid fire, which of course means it's anyone's game. For our first rapid fire question, we're going to be looking at the undefeated, undisputed champion of celebrity boxing, none other than Jake Paul. 5 men have stepped up and 5 men have been forced to step aside as the younger Paul brother has accumulated a 5-0 record. And he's not stopping there, having publicly stated interest in fighting certified dudes such as Tyson Fury and Iron Mike Tyson. These bold declarations got us thinking, what other matchups do you want to see Jake Paul in the boxing ring? And anyone can jump in.
Floyd Mayweather versus Jake Paul, because at this point, it'll be a huge pay-per-view. Why not? Floyd Mayweather's undefeated, so if Jake Paul's undefeated, we'll see who the undefeated champion really is.
It'd be hilarious if Mayweather couldn't beat either of the Paul brothers.
I think rather than that, we should just put Jake Paul versus the SAT or the ACT. let's really see how he is as a person. I mean, come on, guys. We've heard him talk. We've seen his content. We've seen his podcast. Let's see how that goes. I think there he'll be 5-1. So
790 incoming. Matt?
I don't know if I can top that. But I feel like I'm copying him. Jake Paul versus drug test.
So 2 tests he's going to fail. Fair enough. Now, that said, for the originality, Jacob, you're going to be getting the 2 on that one. Sadly, the Washington football team is no more, as it was announced very recently that the franchise would be going by the even more uninspired moniker of the Washington Commanders from here on out. What are they commanding? Last place in the NFC East? Going with a name that sounds like the losing team from an Air Bud movie or a Globetrotters opponent, to be honest, is an interesting choice. It's also a very bad choice. Many are wondering where the Commanders' name ranks among the worst in major sports, and as such, we're looking for your personal pick for worst team nickname, past or present. It just has to be real. Anyone can jump in.
I'm going to have to go, this one you have to think about. The Oklahoma Sooners. Jack Harlow put in Jack Harlow put in a song, "My time is coming sooner, just like Oklahoma." When has Oklahoma's time ever come? I don't see any national championships the last couple of years. I don't see them winning any playoff games. I don't see them competing in other sports besides football. When's their time coming sooner? It's not.
That's a good point. That's true. Great work. It's a fine name, historically based, but this is a good room to be saying that in. Anyone else? Terrible names. There are a lot of them out there. Anything at all?
I'm thinking.
Yeah?
I'm thinking.
It can be something even generic, too. I mean, what are there, 6 Bulldogs in the Power 5? 4 in the SEC alone?
You know what? What a terrible name was? There was a football team in the 40s in the All-American Football Conference called the New York Yankees.
Yeah, really?
So that's a pretty terrible nickname because, one, the Yankees at that point were already established as a great franchise. So I wonder why you would use the Yankee name. Of course, New York Giants football, so it's just one of those things. But that Yankees team is not good at all.
That's even more egregious. Get your own wave, man. Do your own thing. You're right. It was the 40s. Yeah, the Yankees had already won a ton of titles and stuff. Jacob?
There's a minor league. There's a minor league team. It's out of Ottawa or something like that. It's pretty far out there. And they're called the Pickle Pushers. And their entire thing is they base themselves off of dressing up as giant pickles. And I don't know whether that's necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. Kind of like Washington's name. So I think it's just it's a pickle. It's not good, it's not bad, it's a name. So
Jacob, I'm going to be real with you. That is the most outlandish name, but the reason that I specified major sports, I think if we're going by minor league teams, it's just unfair.
That's
right?
Yeah.
There's just too much there.
I'm just going to change it to 12th man then. It's not necessary.
Okay, so we're just going with the rivals at this point. Clark, I think a football team going by the Yankees, once the Yankees were already a big thing, is just so out of pocket. It's so weak. It's been there, done that. So you will be getting the 2 on that one. Next up, the NFL's overtime rules have long been a subject of contention among fans, with tensions coming to a boil as the Bills-Chiefs matchup in the divisional round was essentially decided by a coin flip, as Buffalo lost an offensive barn burner without even getting a chance to touch the ball in overtime. And to be clear, every single person in attendance and watching at home knew that nobody was getting a defensive stop at that point. So, analysts, I'm asking y'all, how do we fix overtime in the NFL? But the catch is, we're looking for wrong answers only.
Singing competition. Have the players sing. Whoever gets the most like claps or something. Like have it be like the Masked Singer or something like that. One of those shows nobody watches. So singing competition solves it. Pat
wait.
Mahomes and Josh Allen busting it out.
Okay, I was going to add chorus or an individual.
Either one.
You know what I think would happen if it was an individual? Like teams would start carrying one less kicker and have a designated like soprano or some great like choir boy singer. I think that would revolutionize the game. You guys?
I think that we should let the kickers be the quarterbacks. Everybody else stays same. You know, offensive line, you still got all the wide receivers, but you got to put in the kickers and just see how they do if they can drive 80 yards.
I want to see that. Actually, I think that would be
Absolutely,
truly
yeah.
entertaining.
I think this is a very simple answer. Have the team each pick a random, like the opposing team, the refs each pick a random player on each team. Have them run Oklahoma drills. I would love to see Aaron Donald going against Rodrigo Blankenship in Oklahoma.
No.
You know, guys, truly, I said wrong answers only, but all these are more fair than the current NFL overtime rules. That said, Jacob, you're going to get the points on this one, but Clark is going to be getting the win. Clark, first win of anybody over the semester. Let's take it to FaceTime.
Okay. So one thing we didn't talk about on the show this week was there was a big announcement in the world of sports. Unless you live under a rock, you probably heard about Tom Brady retiring. And I have some thoughts on this because Tom Brady, growing up, was an athlete I did admire, even though I didn't like him as much at the end because Peyton Manning went to the Broncos, which is my favorite NFL team, and I just didn't really get the same vibe when he was on the Buccaneers that it was kind of like he was with the Patriots. Nonetheless, I still had a great amount of respect for him. But I'm a little bit sad in some ways that Tom Brady retired because it's the end of an era for quarterbacks. Eli Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, Tom Brady, and probably Aaron Rodgers soon are all gone, and Peyton Manning as well. So that means my childhood in sports is over. And it got me thinking the other day. I'm growing up, and I'm about to graduate college in 6 months, and that's kind of a hard thing to realize. And it's difficult to come to grips with because adulting is hard, as we all know. But if you remember my first Crossfire whenever, you remember what my FaceTime was about, the changing of the guard. And it's officially happening, and I am so excited for it. With players like Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and that's not just in football and other sports as well. Luka Doncic, when she starts to get better this season, Anthony Edwards, if he can step up in the NBA, Shohei Ohtani in baseball. Just because my childhood in sports is over doesn't mean I don't have things to look forward to. And if these are the superstars during my adulthood, it's going to be one great ride.
Absolutely. You know what? If we're not at the wide, cut to it right now. Clark, that was downright inspirational. We've got a great era of sports coming up. And we're getting old.
Yeah.
So, congratulations to Clark for winning tonight's game, and thank you all for tuning in to tonight's episode of College Crossfire. Don't forget to follow us on social media at TSTV Sports on Twitter and Instagram. Lastly, be sure to wake up with a One No Sports show. Not this Friday, probably right, but after the freeze. One No Sports, Fridays after the freeze at 10 a.m. For all of us in the studio, all the panelists, everyone in Master Control, I'm Drew Jacob. Have a wonderful evening, and goodbye, TB12.